And we are recording What is Going On, Legend, but welcome back to Beyond the 90. We've got a very special guest with us today. We've got Jason from TalkSport. Jason, how are you doing?
Yeah, evening. Yeah, good. Thank you. You okay?
Yeah, all good. Thank you. All good. All good. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Gary got Gary on. Finally got Gary back on the show. Gary, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. It's been too long, so glad to be back on, and obviously pleasure for inviting me on with Jason as well. So nice to meet you, Jason.
You too.
Fantastic. Yeah, just got a couple of few questions about again your career and things like that as well. So, it's just in general again from your time being like a journalist and things like that. What's been your favorite like post interview moment that you've had with like a fan or with somebody from the media or just somebody as a fan or a manager that you've interviewed? What's been one of your like favorite moments?
Post-interview moments. I remember at Portsmouth in the promotion-winning season. Do you remember Kevin Phillips? I think scoring in a 1-0 win. I think it was down there. If you remember at Radio Leicester at the time, I would go in amongst the fans certainly before and after a game with a radio mic, which is, as it sounds, a microphone without a cable on it. So I was over the far side of where Ian Stringer and Alan Young were, and it got quite leery in a friendly sort of way. Anyway, I interviewed a couple of fans, I think, after the game, and one of them took a bite out of the microphone muff, which I remember tweeting about it afterwards. Very visible that you could see these. So that one stands out as well. There've been one or two others. I mean, I interviewed Jose Mourinho in his first game at Spurs, which was fun and interesting. I mean, it wasn't too incident packed. Pep Guardiola's good to interview, although I think I annoyed him when I talked about VAR with him a couple of times. And then, yeah, Nigel Pearson was interesting. Brendan, interesting. Claudio, fantastic. But yeah, there's been array of different people. But yeah, I think the microphone bite at Bournemouth certainly stands out.
Fair enough. As Bournemouth or Plymouth? So Portsmouth.
Bournemouth, definitely Bournemouth.
Okay, fair enough. No worries. I never had the wrong one. Fair enough. I just got another question as well around if you could, for example, say if you were presenting Match of the Day and you were to pick two people alongside to do the commentary with, who would you want to pick?
As in what, the play-by-play commentary or the pundits?
Either. We could do either, but yeah, the pundits or even the play-by-play commentary.
I mean, we've got a lot of very, very, very good people at Talksport. So, I mean, I don't want to necessarily single too many people out because I might be taking, favoritism. But people that do stand out to me at Talksport, Lucy Ward has been absolutely fantastic for BT Sport, BBC at the moment during the Women's World Cup. She's doing an array of different things as well. I remember listening to her during COVID. I think Leicester were away at Fulham on BT, 6 o'clock on a Tuesday or Wednesday night or whatever it was. And yeah, who's this? She's fantastic. It was one of those things where she's not talking generically about how Leicester were performing. She knew the issues. She knew, I think at that point, we were having set piece problems, which was well documented. But not a lot of people really knew about it outside of the Leicester bubble, let's say. But she was really good and picked up on that. So, yeah, she's been fantastic. I'd love to use her more on TalkSport. I think she's wonderful. And then, yeah, Scott Minto, Andy Townsend have been very good for us. Stuart Pearce is very good. We've got a lot of good people. But yeah, I wouldn't like to necessarily single too many out because I'd always forget one or two and then I'll get angry after listening to them.
You could always, that's the one thing about it. You can always, in hindsight, you always go, oh, forgot them ones, and you get them coming as well. So fair enough.
Dean Ashton's also very good. Chris is very good. Adrian Clark, Courtney Sweetman Kirk. Anybody else I've missed? Yeah, probably.
Fair enough. No worries. Gary, do you have any other questions as well?
No, I'm seeing no room for Rory Jennings there, which I'm not surprised at. No, I think obviously yourself being obviously a Leicester fan and season ticket holder over the years, and obviously being able to actually follow them in a professional aspect as well is something that many of us can dream of, which means you've been at some of the biggest occasions. What would you say, other than the obvious big games like the FA Cup final and things like that? Is there any particular game where you maybe had to hold yourself back from being a fan, maybe a bit more than others?
It's the Ian Stringer reminds me on many occasions. The game away to Sevilla. If you remember, we scored a goal towards the end of that game to make it 2-1, if I remember rightly. Drinkwater crossed to Vardy. Now, the guys at Sevilla got a bit mixed up about the seating there. So we always have to use it's boring, ISDN line to broadcast at some of these places. It's changing a little bit now, but Five Live are also there, obviously BBC, but we didn't have enough seats, or we didn't have the right seats, so they got confused because obviously 2 BBC outlets. Anyway, I had to stand for much of the game in the gangway and just make do. You can hear, if they ever play the goal on Radio Leicester again, which I'm sure they do on a regular and frequent basis, you'll hear me in the background going, yes, yes, yes. And Ian always reminds me of that. And that was always a good moment. Anything outside the obvious? Being at, when was it? Again, it was the promotion winning season. I got sent to, I think, did we beat Sheffield Wednesday on a Friday night or whatever it was? I got sent to Bournemouth against QPR on a Saturday. So if Middlesbrough, I think, had not beaten Derby, which they didn't, and if QPR, I think, didn't beat Bournemouth, then Leicester would be promoted. So I was on the air covering that moment. That was fantastic. The 3 to 4 hours driving home just went like a breeze. That was great. What was the other one I was going to mention as well? I mean, there are so many. That's not meant to sound arrogant. It's a privileged position I've been in over the years. It's fantastic. And actually, I'll mention, the cup final as well, but the FA Cup semi-final against Southampton, I was able to be at that, and not really anybody else was. And it was one of those moments where you're in a 99.9% empty stadium. There's a few press obviously in there covering it, and there's a few local people in there. And it was still a decent atmosphere. And actually, that moment to see, because I don't think I'd experienced crowds in stadiums since COVID had started. That was just wonderful to see. And I always said it'd be an emotional moment to see the King Power full again, which it was the following August, wasn't it? So that was wonderful as well. And again, I use the word privileged to be in this position, because I'm a lucky boy to be able to have done that. We were only allowed 5 people at Wembley, and I was able to be there for that, and it was great. I will never forget moments like that.
And as fans following football, that's what it means as well, the highs and the lows, as you're mentioning as well. But because coming back to something you mentioned as well, having as this being the season ticket holder and then following the fan as well, is there been how's your relationship been with football since you've started journalism, especially following Leicester City as well? Because obviously you've got one side of the fan that wants to say all of these things and feels a certain way, the crowd understands, but then obviously your journalist side, where you've got to go, right, I can kind of have to see this from both sides.
Yeah, it's been difficult over the years. Obviously, when I started at Radio Leicester, what was it, back in 2009, you're just working behind the scenes. You're not necessarily in an on-air capacity. So I suppose you can sort of let go a little bit there, being a fan. But once you become an on-air, I won't say personality, but an on-air presence, that's it. I was reading bulletins, doing news, doing sports bulletins. So I became part of the fabric at Radio Leicester, even on that was a freelance basis. And your role just gets more and more if you progress and you do well. So I ended up presenting Saturday afternoons for 4 or 5 seasons, maybe not as many as that, but it's difficult at times, but you do let go. You have to be objective about things. You can't be a fan interviewing the manager when you're working for a BBC local radio station like Radio Leicester. You can't do that. You have to separate your emotion. But people know, obviously, Ian was a fan, Youngie was a fan, I was a fan, Mike McCarthy, Owen, Matt Elliott, Pipes. Everyone knows it. It's just how you do it. And people often, I say that's wrong. People did accuse us at times of being negative. Now, I don't feel that negativity is the right word to describe it. It's just a realistic assessment of situations, and you sometimes have to say, well, Leicester are rubbish. They've been rubbish. They've been rubbish for some time. Why is this happening? You know, and what that could have been last season if I was doing it. But even in the Great Escape season, yes, Leicester were in games. Yes, they were doing all right, but they were still losing week after week. And there has to be a point where you do have to say they're not good enough, or they didn't look to be good enough, and they weren't at the time. And magically they turned things around, and it was a fantastic end of the season. And the rest, they say, is history for at least 7-8 decent years after that. But yeah, it's tough to separate, but you do it. You've just got to do it because that's the job. And if you don't do the job well, then you don't stay in it, and you can't do it properly. I guess since I've left the BBC, I've not been afraid to voice my opinion on matters on air and on Twitter and on social media, rightly or wrongly. I let myself go, and I am a fan, but I always have to maintain a certain sense of journalistic integrity. I can't be too close to things. If I'm at a ground, if I'm working, I'm not a fan. But if I'm not there, if I'm away from it, then I'm happy to talk to myself as a fan in that way, if you understand that.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Obviously, separating that, which for me it would be so hard to do. As somebody that's like, you see that, you hear some of the crowds, and I again appreciate sometimes that some people from around the crowd that are just, somebody could score a hat trick, does one wrong move, I knew it was rubbish, and it's just you have that in the back of your head as well.
Well,
You hear that.
again, I remember, again under Martin Allen, there were people behind us having a go at Mark de Vries all the time against Watford. Now, I'm not saying he's Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, but I'm not there to harangue I'm not there to boo and shout criticism and be horrible to a player. All right, I might say something. What the flaming hell was that? Or, in more fruitier language. But I don't get not backing a player that from the start of a game. If he's had a crap game, then fine. I think that's okay to let your feelings known, or he's not seemingly putting in the right kind of effort. But Mark de Vries wasn't a very good footballer, but I never saw him put in anything less than 100% for the Foxes. And I was so pleased that day. Leicester won 4-1. I think he scored the final goal, and it was a really good finish up the Kop end. And I turned around to this guy and just, what the hell are you on about? Just, I didn't say anything. I didn't need to say anything, but I like haranguing and getting on the back of players just for the sake of it. We all want the same thing. We all want success. It's just always about the methodology and how you get there. And that's not to say I won't ever criticise a player, because I will. But I think it's always hopefully for the right reasons and justifiable reasons, not just shouting from the crowd going, this and that, when it's just no need for it. And again, it's a similar sort of period. Somebody having a go at Rab Douglas. Again, he weren't very good for Leicester, but what's the point of having a go at him? Is that going to make him play better? Vocally in a stadium, booing, or I just don't understand that personally. I'd rather not say anything.
Yeah, just going back to see what you said there, obviously the difference between separating being a fan and obviously a journalist and all. Obviously I mentioned the likes of Rory Jennings earlier. We're also now starting to see, obviously with the emergence of these YouTubes, these podcasts, and lots of viral clips and stuff. Are you starting to see a change in the way that reporting and journalism is done, as we're now starting to get to a point where it seems that people want that quick YouTube content because it's from a fan perspective? But where these guys have now built their platform, I mean, Mark Goldbridge obviously was sort of the first, he's fully in TalkSport now. Are you finding that then, because of the way they've grown that platform and can now be seen as an asset to the likes of these traditional journalist areas, but more maintaining their sort of fan base to it, do you see that is maybe changing journalism as a whole, or do you think that's just sort of a sort of pocket for some of those guys to come into to change it slightly?
I think it can be part of the overall state of things, or sphere of journalism. I don't think it necessarily has to come and replace anything or do anything. Mark Goldbridge is part of TalkSport, as is Rory Jennings. Now, you may like what they do, you may not like what they do. That's perfectly fine. I don't particularly like every presenter, every program on our radio station. You know, I'm not, you know, I'm sure any other member of the team at TalkSport doesn't like it 100%, you know, 100% of the time. But we understand that there are, you know, different ways of debating things and discussing subjects, and different ways of offering that, whether that's a traditional journalist and co-commentator, or footballer, or pundit, or whether it's a YouTuber or something different. Now, you know, Rory and Mark have both got their platforms. They've built a successful platform. Certainly Mark has, through YouTube, and being that fan's perspective. I see nothing wrong with that. It's not necessarily my cup of tea to watch on YouTube, but you know, he's a fan. It's sport. He's able to talk about it. You know, we're more than just a radio station as well these days. You know, you've probably seen that TalkSport, along with, you know, other broadcasters, are looking at ways to visualize their content, whether that's on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube as well. So it's a way of getting to an audience, I think, using those types of people that wouldn't necessarily listen to, say, TalkSport on a Sunday night at 5 o'clock, where they may watch a YouTube clip, they may watch a YouTube show. So there are different ways of doing it. I think they're assets to the team, whether they are your cup of tea or not. That's cool. But yeah, I see them being part of the fabric rather than a replacement. There's always room for good old-fashioned journalism, people that go and speak to clubs and are amongst clubs, press boxes, make contacts. You know, I always say to people that get in touch with me, like getting involved in the industry, you know, sports broadcasting journalism isn't just sat behind a monitor or a laptop like this. It's about being out there and experience things and knowing people, and you know, making contacts that could potentially help you get stories, or help you with, you may be looking into a story, and then, you know, somebody help, oh, I know this person, they could do this or whatever. So there are different, you know, there are a million ways to skin a cat, as they say, certainly in football as well. And it's the same with journalism. There are different ways of doing it. As long, you know, for me, journalism is always about truth and facts. And as long as we don't stray away from those, I think, you know, different methodologies, different ways of doing things there, it's cool with me.
Cool. Fair enough.
Like this as well, you know, fan podcasts. You know, 10 years ago, this wasn't a thing, was it? And now people are able to do it at the push of a button. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it makes, again, it just gives a different level. And then again, everybody's allowed to express themselves in different ways. Some people will come for the short term and disappear as well, in terms of even media and even fan candor, because in the way that some people will create content, are they going for the clips that can, and playing into a character where that lasts for a shorter period of time, then it kind of fizzles out, or they're being realistic where it gives like smaller growth as you go along as well.
Yeah, because I think even from a TalkSport perspective, I think it was Jamie O'Hara was labelled Mr. Clickbait, you know, because there was a period where a lot of his clips were going viral because maybe they were, you know, slightly on the nose opinions. And it's like you say, I think with the emergence of this new, shall we call it, fast-paced, you know, information, whether it be the TikTok, the YouTube, the quick snippets, and the fact that clips can get viral so quickly with Twitter and things like that as well. Obviously, from a TalkSport, you know, standpoint, and other journalists, if you can use it in the right way, you know, 9 out of 10 people might have disagreed with whatever Jamie O'Hara is saying, but actually it's still engagement. And I think that's where the key thing is. It's making sure the engagement's there, because it might then mean that actually you've now got 10 more people wanting to phone in and put their point across. So you've got more people commenting on it, and then maybe listening to see what he says and back it up. And again, it's that short clip might be the viral part, but actually in a further context, actually what they're talking about can be completely different. And one that I know is really key for that is Simon Jordan. You could take a Simon Jordan clip of something he says about 2 sentences, but in the wider context of what he's actually saying, it's an almost completely different story. And I think that's where, you know, people like TalkSport, even BBC, you know, Sky Sports use those platforms well, because they put out, right, that's the bit that's going to get the bite. when people actually then go and listen to it, they'll realise that the journalist is actually saying, the right things, or at least backing up what they're saying, and it's just an opinion. That's what it is. So I think,
I think you're right. Context is absolutely key. It was a word I was hoping you were going to use as well, because you might have a clip from, it doesn't necessarily have to be us, but a clip which is a minute long, which is to the point, etc. But there might be other things that are asked, discussed on the radio as well, and that's always there. It slightly annoys me when people go, well, that's what TalkSport's like. Well, actually, it's not. There's more to it than that. There is. It is a small part of it. It's not necessarily. We don't go in the morning and go, how are we going to annoy these people? We don't do that. People come up with opinions, and that they, as long as they're logical. It's sport at the end of the day. It doesn't kill anybody, but it's a good thing to be discussing. There are different ways. Some things a little bit more outrageous than others, but like I said, it's sport at the end of the day, and it's not necessarily the be all and end all. It is for a lot of people, sport and football, etc. But when people go on about TalkSport itself and go, well, it's just clickbait, it's just tablet. It's not. We have a range of different shows, styles. We have specialist shows across 2 stations. We have so many live football commentaries and other sports that we do. We're doing rugby this weekend. We did golf last weekend. We got the EFL starting, the Community Shield Women's World Cup. We'll be doing cricket hopefully again soon. We'll be doing a lot of other things that people don't necessarily see, and that doesn't necessarily make numbers in terms of social media, but with what we offer on the radio, we've just had our highest ever audience figures of 3.6 million across the 2 stations. So we're happy with how things are sounding. But yeah, we offer documentaries, specialist shows on motorsports and rugby and women's football. So there is an array of things out there. So people see a snapshot of what we are sometimes, but it's not always necessarily a wider view and context, there's that word again, of how we actually are, and how a lot of companies, I would say, are. They're not. You listen to a podcast, any podcast, could be this one. You could clip 20 seconds of me or you, and it could be something outrageous, but actually we're talking about something completely different.
Fair enough. Yeah, man, it's one of the things as well, because again we're moving to a more, in general, shorter form content where again the context is missing, that it makes a massive difference as well. And just something that I was going to again come back to, in especially last season, it was really good seeing your tweets, and even when you were speaking to Brendan Rodgers about holding him accountable for last season, it was great to hear from you. But how was it down at the media? Was it more again the objective view? Because it was great hearing it from your perspective, but especially when things were really going wrong last season, how was it in terms of like reporting to Brendan Rodgers and things like that?
I always felt I had a good relationship with Brendan. I texted him after he left the football club just to make sure he was cool, he was okay. Don't get me wrong, I thought he was a big reason as to why they got relegated, and I don't think he necessarily recognised the situation that the club were in, despite that very poor start to last season. I thought I was firm but fair. I always ask people, even beforehand, about questions. Is this a fair question? If I asked that, would that be fair? Do you think that would get not a reaction to get a reaction's sake, but the right kind of reaction that we're looking for, or right kind of response, would hold into account that kind of reaction? So yeah, I would always speak to different people, and it would be generally quite positive afterwards when I've been down. And I admit I probably went after they'd lost more times than after they'd won, because they hadn't won any games. And don't get me wrong, I think I could go in and ask things which are slightly more difficult or challenging than maybe some of the local guys or the ones that are there every week, because they have to maintain build that relationship at all times. They can't, go in two-footed and I don't think I went in two-footed because that implies I was probably unfair. I think I asked every question I asked I thought was fair, and I'm happy to debate that, or anybody that comes back to me if they want to after several months after asking questions say that probably wasn't fair. But I'm not big-headed enough to think to be challenged on that myself. But yeah, the relationship was fine. Like I said, I texted him after he'd left. But yeah, it was frosty. I think at times it was frosty. He did make a joke a couple of times about my not allegiance. I don't think it's right. If you remember at Stockport, there was some chants. I don't know whether it was by Stockport fans or Leicester fans. You're getting sacked in the morning. And Jordan from the Leicester Mercury asked about it in the embargo, the written section after the main broadcast section. And Brendan was cool. He said, "Yeah, Jason started it." He laughed, and we all laughed. And I didn't. I said clearly, I said no. And then I think it was after that I'm just using that word. We'd beaten Leeds, I think, on a Wednesday or Thursday night. I go into the post-match press conference because, again, I didn't want to be seen that I was only turning up when they lost. I wasn't going to go to the press conference next week because sometimes I can't go because there's work or whatever. It's about to finish, and then I pipe up because Johnny Evans went off injured, as he does. And I wanted to go. I wanted to find out if he was all right or whatever. And he was like, "Oh, go on, Jason. Go on, ask your question, ask your negative. You like that guy off Strictly?" And then somebody shouted Craig Revel Horwood, and said, "Yeah, that's you." Said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, I'll give you, 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 that night," and he was cool with that. Like I said, I thought that relationship was fine. He knew that I had a job to do, I'm sure, and he had his job to do, and we had to delve into it sometimes about what he was saying. I would, you said that last week, and well, is that true, or what was the relationship? You've got to, I think you've got to push people at times, certainly when obviously things are going wrong. So I don't regret any of that, and like I said, I messaged him afterwards and it was fine. Good terms, no issues. So, and look, he's been at Celtic before and is again now. He's been at Liverpool. He'll face far worse people than me. and face a far fiercer fan base than Leicester fans, I'm sure.
Just go. I've got a couple of questions. Just to one to video that again has been shared on Twitter that I have to play from Charlie Slater again. I'll link it below as well. Just thought I'd play that for you and your just in terms of that as well. So I'll play the video and just get your initial thoughts of that because for me it's just a fantastic video to watch as well.
Well, the person at the end, the woman that comes up and kisses Matt Elliott, is fantastic. I mean, that night, wow. But yeah, that was. I see that every so often. It sometimes pops up on my Twitter feed. I think it wasn't you guys asking about it a few weeks ago, was it? Somebody was.
One of the people that was that have come on the show who's mentioning it because he was met as Glenn. So shout out to Glenn.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, about specifically that. So one of friends of Candidate used one of his favorite clips. He was mentioning from time to time.
Yeah, that. I mean, we were on air at 6 o'clock. Me, Matt Elliott, and obviously 100, 200, 300, 400, however many were in the pub that night. Ian was down at Stanford Bridge, and I'm glad it worked out how the way it did because we were talking about it. Oh, if it goes to that game, can we take Five Lives commentary? Surely we want to be taking that. We couldn't take Five Lives commentary. Actually, thankfully, in the end, I didn't want to because we produced our own thing and did our own thing and pushed the boundaries a bit with what we could do at Stanford Bridge. It was supposed to be updates every few minutes, but it turned into, something a bit more of a regular thing. Yeah, I think we were on air, 7 hours that night in total between us. I think I presented until 10:15. Mike McCarthy then picked up back at the studio with Steve Walsh and started playing a few tracks. But yeah, that clip. I think Charlie was there for East Midlands today, and he had his. I didn't know about this till afterwards, but he was, had his phone and was just in case something happens. I need to record Jason. He'll probably go ape shit or. And obviously, you've seen watching Sky. It's on a 7, 8, 9 second delay or so, whereas the ISDN line, which we have at Stanford Bridge, is pretty much instantaneous back to Radio Leicester. And yeah, so I think I'm talking to Matthew Kenyon, who was formerly at Radio Leicester. It was at the World Service back then. He was covering it for them. So I was on air just chatting to him about the situation. There's however long was left in the game, and because Owen was doing the buttons back in the studio at that point, so he just faded me down, put Ian up, and yeah, the goal went in. I heard that obviously, and just went mad like Basil Fawlty in there, and obviously people were a bit, what the hell is going on? There's a guy in the background who gets it. I forget his name. I know him. That's jumping up and down. Yes, it's coming. It's coming. And then obviously a few seconds later, it happened. And yeah, it's one of those things. Like I said, it pops up every so often, at least once or twice a year. Usually around, was it the 2nd of May as well? The day it happened. Always a very special day for all of us. But yeah, that night was absolutely fantastic. And people ask me, if you could go back in time, where would you go? I wouldn't go back to that night. I'd go back to the day of the trophy lift. I've said it on these sorts of podcasts before. I said it on Radio Leicester before I left. That day that Leicester lifted the trophy was, I think, the most joyous day I've experienced, certainly watching football, maybe ever in my life. I thought the atmosphere around the ground was, you'll never feel anything like it ever again, I don't think, because it was just so, I've said it before, it felt like joy was tangible. The emotion of joy was in the air. It was there. People were just so happy. I mean, if society was like that all the time, fantastic, but unfortunately it's not. But yeah, it was just the perfect day. We got there almost at 11 o'clock in the morning. Actually, no, it was a 5:30 kickoff, wasn't it? So yeah, about 1:30, 1 o'clock or so, and just had a wander around the ground, set our kit up and wandered around just to soak it all in. People go, so we'll go down to the ground and soak up the atmosphere. That day you do on a day like that. And yeah, sunny one I'll never forget in any hurry. I did bawl my eyes out when they lifted the trophy. Ian was on air commentating the trophy lift at the time. I was rendered speechless at that point. And that's the moment. I think you talked about it earlier. That's the moment. How do you separate being a fan and a journalist? Well, at that moment, sod it. It doesn't matter. It's never going to happen again, is it? Not in that manner, anyway.
Yeah, I think everybody was kind of happy enough with any Leicester fan kind of tearing away from reality at that point, because I think everybody knew how big a deal it was. So yeah, I think any Leicester fan in the moment would be forgiven. So I think you would have always got away with that one anyway. So you're right, but it was such a special moment, and obviously now even more immortalised for the fact that there's clips of you dancing around the pub.
Yeah, as long as Charlie doesn't ever delete his account, I'm sure he's got it on his phone somewhere. He can send it to me.
Again, with the internet now, one of the disadvantages is there forever as well. So
yeah, I'm sure it's been copied and twisted and all sorts. Yeah. Although I just remember at the time there were a couple of complaints. I think it was put on Radio Leicester's Facebook feed. Oh, how disrespectful, or something like that, about he's dancing and people before everybody else. Oh, come on.
Yeah, with them ones, they don't understand sport and what it means to people as well. That kind of reaction is just, there isn't any way of, it just comes out. There is the limbs and all sort of thing of football fans. When, even if it's sometimes you've got to refrain yourself. I remember once when I think it was 2-2 when under Club when we played Mourinho's side, and I remember that Harry Maguire scored a last minute winner from Marco Brighton cross, and we were sitting at the bottom, And I remember Harry Maguire comes running over, and this part of my brain's like, jump and hug him, jump. And I was like, I'm not, I can't. But again, refraining yourself as part of that. It's so hard. But when you're in that, when it's everything was going against it, felt like in that match, and it just felt that last glimmer of hope. And you can't put a one reason why I've never left a game early for that exact reason. It's just you can't put a price on how good that feels.
I always remember as well, is it Jim Donnelly behind Cloudy, I think, against Aston Villa?
Yes, the
bald Scotsman, yeah,
yeah,
mad like that, yeah. It's,
he became a cult hero after that. Yeah,
indeed. I mean, we talk about how we celebrate. Would you have celebrated if we'd have stayed up? Because I wouldn't.
No,
I'd have been
this
happy.
season.
I'd have been happy, but I'd have been no. This is.
Yeah, I think
appalling position to be in from where they were, not necessarily because of what happened, but how it happened. You know what I mean?
That's exactly the thing. I mean, we've been on the obviously I've been on the show with Neil and a couple of the other guys in some of their channels, and we've been saying it. We were saying the same thing as the season went through. You know, it was so. Yes, it was such a poor season, and there was still that way out of it, but we were still sitting there going, but even if we stay up, we were still questioning whether or not you keep Rodgers, still questioning which of the players should be moved on and sold. You were questioning what was going wrong. So yes, we would have been happy to stay up. Obviously, we all want to be in the Premier League, but celebration-wise, no, it wouldn't have been that case. I mean, we wouldn't, and I even think even if we'd have stayed up on the last day, for example, I don't think we would have seen the scenes like you've seen at Goodison Park, where they're pitch invasion with flares and flags for finishing, 17th 2 seasons in a row. I don't think we would have done. And I certainly wouldn't, because we were so unhappy with everything it was about. I think through the season, it also became apparent that it wasn't just about what was happening on the pitch. There seemed to be a lot of issues behind the scenes that were maybe starting to come out. There were people being questioned, maybe just from a fan perspective. We were maybe questioning those things, but I think there were so many warning signs for us, and let's say we spoke about them in depth on various shows, that it would have been a bittersweet thing. It would have been great to stay up, but hold on, that's not the be all and end all. There's so much more here that needs to be resolved. That's my opinion anyway. I wouldn't have been celebrating it.
No, I don't think so. I think I accepted relegation, but as soon as we scored, that's when I started to get nervous, because I was like, right, that was the thing. I was like, oh no, we've got hope now. Oh, this feels weird, because I would kind of assign myself to relegation for the majority. After the Fulham game, Bournemouth games, so many, Southampton game was another one. Just felt like it's just not going to happen. Crystal Palace.
I think for me, it was the Leeds-Everton sort of double header there. Maybe more so because that was the first game I'd actually been able to get to in years, being in Northern Ireland. So I'd flown over for that game, and then obviously the disallowed goal from Tielemans and stuff. There was limbs everywhere, because we thought, we win that, we beat Everton, then that's fine. But I think after, like I say, we obviously drew with Leeds, and it felt like a hollow result. You still had that hope going into Everton. Once that was then not it, that for me, that was when I went, right, no, that's it, I've checked out. If we stay up, it's going to be a miracle. But either way, we don't actually deserve it at this point. So, yeah, I think that was where, for me, I kind of started to turn that corner. So it was coming. It was still sad when it happened, obviously. But likewise, if we'd have stayed up, I wouldn't have then been over the moon, celebrating it. I would have just been, right, I'm glad we stayed up, but now something needs to change.
I mean, I wrote a piece. I don't know whether you read it for TalkSport. I had it ready there or thereabouts. Although it was nearly 2,000 words originally. They asked me to cut it down. It's about 1,100. They said 1,000, but it was about 1,100 in the end. It was pretty much ready to go a week before it had happened, the relegation. But I wrote two different pieces. If they'd stayed up and had they gone down, and I just needed to add a few different bits. Depending on results and against Newcastle, West Ham, etc. But they were largely the same. If they'd have stayed up, it'd have been the same. If they'd gone down, which they have, it was the same. So there needed to be I'm sure you've debated this. We've all debated this ad nauseum since May and probably earlier. Enough people were truly understanding of the shit that they were in terms of where Leicester were in the table, and how to get out of it. Complacency all over, boardroom downwards.
Yeah,
and I stand by that.
Yeah, and this exactly sort of echoes things that we've said before. And still, even to this day, there's still so many people that haven't been held accountable for that. Like you say, certainly from the top downwards. Yes, Brendan Rodgers lost his job at the end of it. We've seen players go, but actually we've seen players go, and even some of the players haven't necessarily been held as accountable as they should.
Players have gone because they have to, not
Yeah.
because they're being held accountable, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that was a natural order, and again, we're still sitting there, and there is, yes, okay, we're looking at this new era and stuff, but there's still so many things at the club. Different people, like you say, from bordering down, need to have been held accountable for the season as a whole, and even getting to this point. So even if, yes, we've got Enzo in and we move forward, if we get back up, that's great, but it doesn't undo all that bad work, shall we say, or all those issues that were at the club that caused it in the first place. So
to balance, though, I would say, and this is not just me being a journalist, but to balance, there were a lot of good times under the current regime and the owners. John Rudkin as well, he gets so much flack, and justifiably so. Don't get me wrong on that, but he also oversaw a promotion, a great escape, a title win, a FA Cup win, Community Shield, so
Champions League campaign.
League. So to say it was totally rubbish under him and whatever, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, it's not been great. Recruitment's been terrible. Not clearly the appointment of Brendan was the right thing to do, but to keep hold of him for so long was the wrong thing to do. He should have gone back in September, in my opinion. Hindsight is always a wonderful thing, but I wouldn't necessarily have been unhappy if he'd have gone at that point. I don't want any manager to go, because it means Leicester, if they're being sacked or whatever, it means they're unsuccessful. It means they're doing badly. Claude Puel, I didn't warm to him as a manager. I don't think many people did, but I didn't want him to fail, because that means Leicester failed. And it's the same with anybody at the club. You want success, and it might not be your cup of tea as a particular manager or whatever, but I said it earlier, we all want the same thing. We all want success. It's just sometimes how that method is. But like I say, John Rudkin, as much as he's done well, as much as these owners have done well, the last 18 months, 2 years have been pretty bad. And it's that sharp decline, as I mentioned already, that's irked me, and I'm sure a number of other people as well. Not necessarily the position that Leicester are in, because people always talk about, oh yeah, but they've always been historically a yo-yo club, and we were in the third tier 15 years ago. That's a long time ago now. I don't like references to that anymore, because it was a long time ago. When I was in the year 2000, I was 14, 15 years ago, was 1985. It felt like a lifetime away, and it was. And no offense, League One is now to a lot of people. A lot of people don't even know or remember it. Neil, how old are you? Do you remember it?
30. So yeah, it's not. Again, that was kind of the time I started. I'm Generation Andy King. That's how I say it. Kind of watch going his development, going through the different eras of the squad. So yeah, so that's mine. But it's, again, League One was, again, it's very, didn't go too many away days, but when I did, it was what is this? Because especially used to the King, the Walk Stadium at the time.
It's a novelty, and I get that why people sometimes look fondly back at that. But I'll be honest, I'm not interested in that kind of nostalgia. My nostalgia for me is Champions League, Premier League, and that's not entitlement. That is a deep want and deep desire for the club to be the best it can. Right now, it is not the best it can be. People are looking forward to, you'll be fine in the Championship. You'll get to go to a few away grounds. I'll be honest, I don't want to be. I don't look at it like that. I want to spend. I want the club to spend the least amount of time possible in the Championship. People going about, it's a great league, and it is a fantastic league. It's very competitive, and that's part of the reason I don't want to be in it, because it is competitive, and anybody can beat anybody. But it's just not the best Leicester City can be, and that's again, I'm repeating myself, but it's the sharp decline to get to this position that's irked me, not the fact that they are there, because I will follow and follow Leicester whatever division they're in. I did in League One. I lived in London that season. I was doing a postgrad. I lived about 5-10 minutes walk away from the New Den, I think it was still called then. Saw Leicester win there. I think Steve Howard scored. Saw Leighton Orient Leicester down there as well. So yeah, there were interesting new places to go, but I don't want to ever experience anything like that ever again. No, I remember again speaking to Ian and the Radio Leicester team after we went out the Champions League. I think it was me, Ian, Owen, Jack, Rafferty went to Bradgate Park on was it the Thursday or the Wednesday? I think we played whichever day, the day after. We were all tired and knackered, and but it felt like a drug being in the Champions League. Just so addictive that I'm so desperate to experience nights like that again. And I'm going to make an admission here. Before the FA Cup win, people were going, what would you rather have, FA Cup or Champions League? I said Champions League. I did. Leicester would not be in Championship if they won the Champions League. However, if they'd qualified for the Champions League back then. However, what I was talking about was a load of bollocks. Winning the FA Cup's fantastic. It was the second best day of my life.
I think, but I understand where you're coming from though, because like you say, if you're in the Champions League, there's no danger of relegation. There's no danger of any of that. Like it means you're at the top end. You're being the best club, and it's on a more consistent basis. Like you're saying, we've seen teams win trophies and get relegated. Birmingham, Wigan, for example. Yeah. It's great to win them, absolutely, and obviously for Leicester, it completed that puzzle. But at the same time, like you say, if somebody was saying which do you want, Champions League means something else. It's season after season. If you're doing that, you're at that level. So it becomes addictive. And it's not, like you say, it's not an entitlement. But once you get a taste of European football, even whatever level it's at, even with, I know certainly our fans really embrace the Conference League. And once you get a taste of that, it's that this is where we want to be. We want to be at this end of the league. We want to be at this end of football. We don't want to be down in the in the lower divisions, scraping for points there and not getting that full feeling when we know the potential the club has. And I think where we move from, even if you take the title win out of it, as a club it had evolved from those days. And we look at training ground, we look at the signings that are coming in, we look at the things we've done. That was the end that we needed to be at. So it wasn't entitlement to be there, but it was an admission that we'd evolved. And that's why, like you've already touched on, the whole line, we were in League One 15 years ago, stop complaining. And say, exactly that. It was 15 years ago. This is a different club now. So to see us go from that to slip, again, like you say, rapidly down and end up in the Championship. Yes, Championship's a good league, but we're all sitting there going, we need out of it as soon as possible. The club needs to move back forward.
And remember, last year, Leicester were in a European semi-final. Last year. And now they're going to be playing Carabao Cup first round.
It's crazy.
But it shows you as well about, you mentioned the word before, complacency. You can't be complacent because we found out the hard way as well. But yeah, just go a couple of questions as well before we finish. Just one thing I wanted to get your thoughts on again, Maresca and the current era we're in, because it seems like, and as we'll talk about a little bit off camera about to Gary about the fans at Northampton now, there seems to be a rejuvenation in the squad, in the feeling, in the mentality. So I just want to get your thoughts on Maresca and what he's brought to Leicester City, even though we've not even started the league yet.
Yeah, I think it's a different appointment, wasn't it? It wasn't, I was not particularly enamoured with Dean Smith as a manager. He was a good person to speak to. Got no issues with him on a personal level, even though I only did it 2 or 3 times. And he seems like a good person to speak to, as they all are, to be fair. No one's a particular obnoxious person at all. Maybe Nigel was a couple of times, but that's fine. We'll let him go on that one. But no, he's a good bloke as well. But yeah, he seems to be building, obviously, from the back. I've seen several signings come in. Goalkeeper, a couple of defenders, Harry Winks. I think it's just those attacking players that you want to bring in now. Hopefully, those won't be too far away. I think he said to Owen on Radio Leicester today that he hopes to have the bulk of the signings in and team available for that game against Coventry week on Sunday. Wow, it comes around quickly, doesn't it? But no, I'll be honest, I know very little about him as a manager, as a person, as a coach. Obviously, I'm aware he was at Man City, had a spell as a manager in Italy, didn't go particularly well there. but you don't work under Pep unless you're pretty decent. So I was pleased with the type of manager I think they went after. Again, somebody different. It wasn't Dean Smith. It was, who else was linked? Scott Parker was mentioned. Again, people turned up their nose about him, but then he's won 2 promotions out the championship in very recent memory. So yeah, but he's never been able to keep anybody up, or he's never. Yeah, but let's get there first. So I watched as much as the Northampton game as I could. I find pre-season friendlies a little bit dull if I'm not there. Again, they're always good content sessions where you can get post-match interviews for broadcasters, radio. So I enjoy going to them in that capacity. I don't enjoy necessarily watching them as a fan because they're just glorified training exercises. But he seems to be putting in a pattern. Harry Winks seems to be the man of the moment to try and dictate how things are going to be. I hope he's a signing that is or has some hunger about him. Obviously, it's not gone well for him over the last couple of years, but again, he's still a player that started. All right, Spurs didn't play particularly well, but started a Champions League final not that long ago, 3-4 years ago, whenever it was. So yeah, hopefully he's got something about him. And you look at the caliber of signings, and actually, if we'd have signed them this time last summer, would they have been top caliber or the best we could possibly get? Well, I don't know. I mean, the signings last summer were non-existent. The ones before that were terrible on the whole. Actually, to be a little bit kinder, I said in my article, they've made little to no impact, which, Daka has his moments. Samare, I'm sorry, I'm just not a fan. Bertrand was, yeah. And there were probably 1 or 2. Vestergaard, yeah. I mean, if he plays, I hope he does really well. If he has to feature a few times, then fantastic. I would like to hope that people like him and everybody start with a clean slate. So, he might be all right in the Championship. He might have, he was all right in the Premier League for Southampton, surely at some point. So, hopefully, we see something of him. But no, I am encouraged. It was just a bit annoying about the Spurs game at the weekend being postponed, but that's what happens when you play in a rainy climate at this time of year. Hopefully, it's better against Liverpool. They got a win today, didn't they, against a local side? So, yeah, I think there is a positivity about the place. I've not been down the training ground since the press conference at the start of July, but even speaking to people in and around the place, it's different. I remember just over a year ago or under a year ago, about September, October, speaking to somebody, I heard this from somebody, the place was miserable, absolutely miserable place to go. But I would ask about it in the press conference. Brendan would go, yeah, it's fine around here. Of course he'd say that. Of course, any manager's not going to go, yeah, it's like a morgue around here.
Yeah, but, everyone's falling out.
I got the impression, I heard it from good people that it wasn't a pleasant place to be around. But yeah, from what I'm hearing now, it's completely different. And hopefully, any of those people that don't necessarily want to be here, of course, in an ideal world, they'd be gone. But if they do stick around, let's hope that they just give their all for whatever happens over the coming months. And, this time, in May, hopefully we've got a successful story in our hands. So my fingers and toes are crossed. It was, I've had my first season ticket since we got relegated to League One. Like I said, I gave it up when I moved to London that season. And I've not had one since. I managed to get one. And actually, the day I got it, I was so excited, it's like opening a present on Christmas Day when I'm 5 years old. It was it felt that good actually. I was like a giggly child.
To be fair, I've sort of done the same because I bit the bullet this year and decided I was going to buy a membership with the idea of getting a few tickets because I might actually be able to get to some games, and even just getting the emails to show me that, oh yeah, it's going to go down to my membership option. I'm sitting there going, oh, this is great. This is fantastic. So yeah, that was good. No, just one thing is, obviously you mentioned about the pre-season schedule. All right, yes, it's unfortunate the Tottenham game was called off. We understand that the club obviously has a need to go to Thailand and appease that side of fans, and absolutely, listen, it's part and parcel of modern football. Obviously, ingrained in the Thai culture with obviously the owners and everything, so you have to understand that. But Do you think maybe that was also something that showed a little bit of complacency in the club because of how close it is that their return is going to be to the start of the championship season, that maybe they thought it wasn't going to be something they were dealing with?
I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to be doing ahead of a championship season, certainly this close. Complacency, perhaps you could say that, but I don't think anybody thought they would be in the championship when perhaps they were talking about doing the deal to put this tournament or whatever it is tour on. Certainly with Liverpool and Spurs involved as well. So I would imagine this would have started months and months ago. So I think it's unfortunate the way it's happened. I think I would like to have seen more games over here. I know they've obviously played Peterborough behind closed doors and Leuven last week. If I'm right, they weren't obviously 45-minute half games. They were a bit longer than that. That was always the plan with those. So I get that as well. But I think fans, from a fan's point of view, and again, this is from somebody who's not necessarily the biggest fan of pre-season or attending or watching or whatever. I think it's important for fans to see their club here, even if it's. I mean, I remember going to York with Radio Leicester covering pre-season, Rotherham at the Don Valley Stadium. That was my first ever reporting shift at a game. Where else have we been? Alfreton, Oxford, places like that. Burton, Mansfield. I think one or two more of those for fans to attend would have been nice, but I'm not going to get too down on it necessarily. Fitness is the main thing. As long as they're fit and ready for that opening game, they can go to the Antarctic for all I care. As long as fans can see it, of course, on LCFC Hub or whatever it's called these days.
Fox's Hub, is it? Some Foxy TV, yeah. No, because the reason I asked as well, because like I say, I managed to get across to the Northampton game because I happened to be over in England that weekend, and I actually had a wedding that evening. And I was like, do I go? Do I not go? So I decided.
You went, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, of course I went. I went, and I had to leave 20 minutes into the second half, but do you know what? It was worth it. But
yeah,
I think from a fan's perspective, it's been a bit disappointing. Not only because obviously they're not getting to see that, but like I have a friend that's a Northampton fan, and he texts me several days before the game saying, "You guys are bringing 4,000 fans here. Like we're gonna have like 2.5 max. Like it's gonna be yours." And maybe the naivety of being a Premier League fan, I said, "Oh yeah, 4,000. Oh, we'll just have the stand behind the goal." Only to turn up and realise that we'd sold out 3 of their stands to their 1. And, obviously there was a reality of the low leagues, but I think it has been a bit of a shame that it shows that the fact that I know Northampton is only down the road, although it's not the easiest to get to anyway, but, 4,000 fans travelled down for what was the first pre-season game. After a season of relegation, yes, with a new manager, we've made some signings and stuff, but to see that many fans down there, and actually in good voice as well, which was good to see. It was then maybe a disappointment that we had that, and then it's just been behind closed doors. It's been, away, abroad, everywhere, and then actually the next time we're going to get to see them in the flesh is going to be that first game. Yeah.
Well, can I ask a question to you then? Because I see things as a fan slightly differently because I get to go to press conferences, I see behind the scenes and all that. Do you feel the connection between the club and the fans has waned over the years? And that might be a slightly loaded question there, but feel free to row back on it a little bit if you want. But do you feel connected with the football club?
It's probably a difficult one for me to answer because I now live in Northern Ireland. So I've not been able to maybe notice it firsthand. So Neil can probably give you a better answer than myself. But I do feel like it has slipped, and I feel like since the days when I used to go, I grew up in the Martin O'Neill era, going down to Filbert Street, sitting in the double decker, and then the Carling stand and all that sort of thing. So back then you felt like you were a part of it, and it felt real close. Now, all right, I was a lot younger, so maybe it's a different perspective on it.
Leicester City as a club felt smaller, to be, club, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think so. But then even, I think even when we did move into the new stadium, obviously the Walker Stadium as it was then, those couple of yo-yo years and stuff, I think there was still that feel that you were slightly connected. But I do think over time it has felt less connected, certainly from my point of view. Maybe that's just because, it's so difficult for me to get tickets now, not being a member, not being that. I don't know what it's like maybe for the guys that are able to still go every week, but certainly I do feel that, it's just, first come, first serve, whoever's there, right, great, we're going to take the money off you. Here's a football team. The rest is, there's £75 for a new home shirt. Great. So I do feel that there is that disconnect somewhat. But again, my views probably skewed because, like I say, the Northampton game is the first game. Well, sorry, the Leeds game last year was the first game I've been to since before COVID, where I managed to get tickets to the Burnley game, where I think Johnny Evans was fouled for their equaliser. And then before that, I hadn't been probably since Championship days. So it's maybe a bit skewed, but I think Neil will probably be able to give you a bit more of a insight on that going more often.
I think it's just speaking to other fans and just being around the ground. I think the thing that recently, I think it was last year with the whole tickets, and that's what really annoyed fans. We've heard anecdotal stories of people that have passed away that couldn't get their tickets because they couldn't bring. There was things like that I think put a real stain on the football club because of apparently some things that were happening with certain fans, and the away ticket allocations and things like that, especially last year. I think that waned on the fans a lot just from hearing from people talk. I think that was a big thing, but I agree. But that's one thing that really irks me recently, just hearing fans and stories are going around on Twitter or friends that we know about that they've gone to the ground, and because they couldn't produce somebody's ID, they couldn't go. And there's things like that which loses that connection that I loved growing up for the football.
So just quickly on that, because I actually, the Leeds game, like I say, I flew over from Northern Ireland. So, for me, I think it cost me the guts of £200-250, flights, accommodation, all that. But there was actually a guy that we met in the concourse who had travelled from, from the Isle of Man, and he got there and it had been a randomly selected ID. He hadn't brought his ID with him, couldn't get into the ground. He was already obviously, I don't know how familiar yourselves are with Leeds, but obviously for anybody watching, you sort of come through a pre-gate to get down into their sort of holding area where they have their outside concourse part before you get to the turnstiles. So he'd come through that, was able to stand there and, was obviously having a few beers with people, and that's when he got the notification. So now there's a guy that's going to be stood in the middle of Leeds, travelled all this way to watch his team. And it could well have been that a friend of his had a ticket for somebody else. They weren't able to go, offered it to him. He's travelled. But then, you've got a guy who's just outlaid a load of money, but there's no care for it there. And I understand they're trying to do it for certain aspects, and ticket touting and that kind of thing. I do get the understanding of it, but it seems that actually there on the day, it then kind of, there's always no sympathy on that they're now, nobody else is taking that ticket. Nobody else is going into that ground on that ticket. This guy's here. It's, it is a tough one to take. And I think it's situations like that have arisen. And like Neil said, obviously there's people that weren't able to change memberships over for somebody that passed away. And they were saying, oh, no, you can't. And it's those sorts of things that I think really caused an issue between the club and the fans, certainly on Twitter and from what we've read and heard from people.
And to get my season ticket, so I went into the ballot at the end of the season, got the email that's saying, yeah, you're in. So two of my family members are moving seats, and I happened to find out the day before they were actually going to see Jim Donnelly at the club about moving seats. So they were going down to the ground and wanted to change and everything. But I spoke to a family member and saying, obviously I've got access to a season ticket now. Think I'll be able to come and sit with you guys? So I emailed Jim. He got back to me, and this isn't because I don't think I got any preferential treatment over this or anything, because I'm not a big deal in any way. I covered Leicester City for a few years, and this isn't not me bragging in any way, because I don't think it's necessarily about that. But I emailed Jim. He said, "Yep, no problem. I'll have a chat with your friend when he comes down." And the following morning on the Friday, I got a phone call. Yep, no problem. How do you want to pay for it? You sat next to them here. It was sorted. 500 odd quid later, mine, but it was So for me, they were very helpful through that process. I couldn't ask for anything more. Emailed, yep, no problem. Give us a call, or we'll call you when he comes. And it was sorted. So there is also good elements to things as well, not just always maybe some of the more difficult things that we hear as well, which can be totally valid as well. Not to dismiss that in any way whatsoever.
I think that you sort of hit the nail on the head there a little bit as well, though, isn't it? We're always going to hear about the bad stories and the doom and gloom from it. You know, people aren't going to necessarily always share the positive sides of it because people expect that's what should happen. But you know, maybe that's why the bad outweighs the good. But you know, it's like I say, I think there are people at the club, and obviously Jim seems to be one of them that you know they're still the fabric of that club, and they will want to work with people. The club still wants fans in the stadium. You know, so
I think it was also and I've not said this publicly before, but it was at the Spartak Moscow game. There was somebody. We were again. I'm not bragging. I had hospitality tickets that day. BT Sport offered some. The boss said it was fine. So a few of us, me, Joe Bruin from 442 back then, and a couple of the others, went to the game. So we were sat in front of some of the boxes right behind us, and I heard something which was, let's say, discriminatory. So it annoyed me and really pissed me off. I didn't say anything at the time, but then I emailed Jim in the morning and explained to him. I said, "This is where I was. All right, we'll have a chat with the people that had the box that night." And he spoke to them, and they said they were mortified that there was even an accusation like that. But they'd have a chat. So again, I didn't know what happened in the end, but my point is, I reported something. I felt it was dealt with as well. So again, another positive about that. Again, my experiences aren't going to be the same as everybody, and their experience aren't going to be the same as mine. But things happen, and good things do happen as well. So I'm pleased that they do.
Yeah, and I think just in general, overwhelmingly, the reason why we go to football is overwhelmingly positive. The majority of interactions and things we have on a day-to-day basis with the club. So again, just want to kind of highlight that as well. But I just want to again thank you, Jason, for coming on. Again, really, really appreciate it. Again, so where can the people find you?
Where can people find me? Usually on a train down to London on a Monday or a Thursday, which I'm doing tomorrow. Jason Bourne 18. No, I can't even say my own Twitter feed now. Jason Bourne 1986. So you can come and abuse me on there. No, please don't do that. It's horrible. Twitter's not or is it Twitter anymore? Is it X now?
X Twitter. I don't know. It's
a horrible place. It can be, just mute and block people all the time. You can do. It's fine.
No, but yeah, thank you so much, Jason, for coming on. Again, if everybody could like, subscribe, make sure you can check out Jason. I'll leave his Twitter below. We'll see everybody in the next video. So goodbye.